The sound of those scissors still lives in my head. Cheap metal scraping up the side of my dress while a cop with a badge and an ego decided he was going to put me in my place. One hard yank, one ugly rip, and my green wrap dress was sliced from hem to hip, my leg and my underwear out in the sun on a quiet, rich street where nothing louder than a leaf blower is supposed to happen. I was on my own front porch in Silver Ridge Meadows clutching the torn fabric like armor, while Officer Cole Harper stared at me like I was garbage. Someone left on his sidewalk and said, "Almost bored trash in silk is still trash. Remember who runs this neighborhood?" Then he tossed the scissors into my flower bed and walked back to his cruiser like he'd taken out the trash. My name is Jordan Ellis, and this is the story of how that moment of arrogance turned into the biggest mistake of his career. Before I walk you through how we got from that porch to a courtroom, I want you to think about something with me. Have you ever had someone with authority look at you and decide before you opened your mouth that you didn't belong there? A teacher, a boss, a security guard, a cop, and you could feel it in your chest, that little flare of anger and fear at the same time because you knew exactly what they were doing, but they had the power. You know what I mean? If that sounds familiar, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Hit like if you've ever been judged on sight, and sit with me for a bit because this story starts ugly, but it does not stay there. Silver Ridge Meadows looks like a TV commercial. Brick houses matching mailboxes, kids on scooters, golden retrievers. People here use words like quiet and safe like they're part of the address, but what they really mean is people like us. And when I rolled in with my dark SUV, my brown skin, and my out-of-state plates, I didn't need anyone to say anything. I could feel the blinds twitching, the curiosity and the suspicion. Single black woman, nice car, no husband, no kids, no moving truck full of hand-me-down furniture. They didn't know where to put me, so they decided I probably didn't fit. What none of them knew was that the little house on the corner was mine, free and clear, not rented, not borrowed from a boyfriend, bought with money. I earned climbing from a one-room apartment over a laundromat to a job that pays me to stay calm in very hot rooms. They just saw mystery woman on the corner. I saw exactly what it was meant to be, an undercover base with decent schools and terrible HOA emails. I met Harper 3 days after I moved in. I was barefoot in the driveway flipping through junk mail when his cruiser rolled up and drifted halfway into my driveway. Not enough to block me, just enough to say, "This is my block." He leaned on the door hand on his belt and gave me that friendly but not smile. "Afternoon, ma'am. We like to know who lives around here. Helps us keep things safe," he said. I told him my name, that I work remote, that the deed and the car are in my name, and he nodded slow like he was humoring me. Then he started talking about the police support fund, how most neighbors kicked in a little something each month so priority calls got faster, response times on their street, said it like a casual suggestion. But his eyes never left my face, watching to see if I understood. It was really a toll. I just kept holding my mail and asked if it was an official program. He chuckled in that way that says, "Don't play dumb." When I didn't reach for my wallet, he changed tactics. "Look, you seem like a smart girl. No reason we can't help each other out. My partner and I get off around 7. Let me take you to dinner. We can talk about how things work around here." And we both knew exactly what that meant. Pay or play or life gets harder. I thanked him, told him I was busy. Not just that night, and you could feel the air change. The smile dropped and he tapped his boot on my driveway and said, "People who move in here respecting the system don't have problems. People who don't usually regret it." Then he left a little squeal of tires as he pulled away. That could have been the end of it if he'd let it be, but men like that rarely do. A few afternoons later, it was hot and heavy outside, the kind of air that makes you move slow. I put on my favorite green wrap dress, grabbed my metal watering can, and stepped out to give my plants a drink. I'd barely started when I heard the familiar engine and saw his cruiser slide up to the curb again. This time, straight nose, tight to my lawn, no smile, no small talk. He walked up the path like he owned the concrete and said, "We need to talk," then launched into a speech about my attitude, how I'd moved in acting like you're better than this place, how my dress and my car didn't change the fact that he ran this street. His voice got heavier the longer he talked, and his eyes barely touched my face, just moved up and down like I was evidence he didn't like. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't going to fold on my own porch, so I said as evenly as I could, "I respect the badge officer. I don't respect people who hide behind it." And the look that crossed his face made my stomach flip. He stepped a little closer, close enough that I could smell coffee and mint on his breath. Then his gaze slid over my shoulder to the clay pot by my steps where my gardening tools sat. He reached over, picked up the shears, tested the weight in his hand like he was trying on a thought, and said, "This little dress cost more than my paycheck, huh?" There was a part of me that wanted to stay completely quiet. But there was another part, the one that gets stubborn when someone pushes, and that part answered, "It cost more than your paycheck, and you still don't get to touch me." My mouth got there before my fear. That's when he gave me this slow, mean smile. "Trash and silk is still trash," he said, then grabbed the fabric at my hip and dragged the metal straight up, ripping the dress open like wrapping paper. The sound was loud in the quiet street. My thigh flashed in the sun. I could feel, not see blinds moving, and I just froze, hands flying to hold the torn dress together while he tossed the shears into my flowers and leaned in one more time. "Next time, it won't just be the dress, Jordan, take the warning." Then he walked away like he hadn't just committed a crime in broad daylight. When I finally closed the door behind me, my hands were shaking so hard I dropped the lock twice. I changed into jeans and a hoodie and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. Part of me was 16 again, being told by a teacher to watch my tone when I asked a fair question. Part of me wanted to curl up and cry, and another part, the one that sat on a witness stand and run debriefs, started quietly listing facts, date, time, location, witnesses, words, threats. Because here's the twist. Most people on that street didn't know, and Harper never saw coming. Jordan, the remote designer, is just a cover in my real life. I'm a special agent with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and that cute little house he thought he was patrolling was an undercover site sitting right in the middle of a precinct we were already worried about. We'd been looking at his department for months, numbers that didn't make sense, traffic stops and use of force reports that seemed to land on the same kinds of names, complaints that all ended with unsubstantiated settlement checks going out quietly instead of cases going to court, and one name kept coming up at the center of it. Officer Cole Harper, veteran, lots of proactive policing on paper, a storm of smoke around him off the record. I picked up my secure phone, called my supervisor, told her exactly what he'd just done, told her I was physically okay, but he'd escalated from shaking people down to assault under color of law, and I said he's going to come back. He needs to control the narrative because men like that always do. She told me to breathe, to be ready, and that she'd start moving the bigger pieces. A couple of hours later, I heard the same engine again. This time the cruiser stopped dead center in front of my house. Harper stepped out holding a folded citation like a prop, his younger partner, Officer Eli Brooks, trailing behind him with that tight look some rookies get when they know things aren't right, but don't know how to say it before I opened the door. I propped my personal phone behind a vase on the little table in the entryway, hit record, straightened my shoulders, and then answered the bell. He put on his official tone, said they were there to issue me a ticket for disturbing the peace and failure to comply with a lawful order, repeated those phrases like he was writing them into the air, then added that earlier I'd come at him with a pair of gardening shears, and he'd chosen not to arrest me out of professional restraint, and if they had to come back, well, things would get more serious. Brooks barely looked up. He just stood there as a second uniform in the frame, and that was the point, another body to back up whatever story Harper wanted to tell later. I asked calmly, "What law exactly did I break?" "Officer," let him repeat the lie and the threats. Then I signed the ticket and said, "Thank you. I'm sure we'll see each other again soon," and closed the door. As soon as the lock clicked, I sent that recording straight into our evidence system, and by the next morning phone calls had happened that I wasn't in the room for justice talking to the city talking to the department, and suddenly inside the building the narrative was flipped, not problem resident but officer shows, restraint with difficult new homeowner. The deputy commissioner called our chief, Chief Ramirez, said he wanted to highlight the case as an example of proactive community policing. Asked for a small meeting in the chief's conference room with internal affairs present to take a sworn recorded statement they could use in training. That's when I knew we had him. That afternoon, Harper and Brooks and their sergeant Nolan Briggs walked into a wood-paneled conference room believing they were there for a pat on the back. The chief sat at the head of the table. Two internal affairs detectives had notepads and a little digital recorder with a red light blinking, and they asked Harper to walk them through the incident in his own words on the record. He told them exactly the story you'd expect someone like him to tell, that I'd been hostile and disrespectful from the first hello, that I'd cursed him out and threatened his job, that I'd grabbed the shears and lunged at him, cut my own dress in a struggle, that he'd used minimum force to protect himself, and then kindly decided to only issue a citation instead of arresting me. He wrapped it all in phrases like based on my training and experience and in the interest of de-escalation. When they turned to Brooks and asked if that matched what he'd seen, he hesitated for just a beat, then nodded and said, "Yes, sir." That's what happened. Both of them said they'd swear to it. That's when there was a knock on the door, and I stepped in. Not in a torn dress this time, but in a navy suit with my badge clipped at my hip. I introduced myself as Special Agent Jordan Ellis with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and also the homeowner they'd been talking about, and you could feel the room change. I looked at Harper and asked, "Officer, just so we're clear, the account you just gave them, that's the truth?" He tried to keep his cool, said, "Yes, ma'am, 100%. So I set my phone down next to their recorder and pressed play, and his own voice filled the room from my entryway, threatening me with more serious consequences, accusing me of attacking him, claiming he could have arrested me and chose not to. My voice on the recording was calm and steady, asking what law I'd broken, not matching anything he'd just sworn to. Then we pulled up my neighbor's doorbell camera footage on the screen, and everybody watched as I stood by my mailbox as he walked up as he went to my porch and picked up the shears as he grabbed my dress and cut it while I didn't lay a hand on him. No lunge, no struggle, just a man using his badge as a weapon because he thought no one would ever hold him to account. The internal affairs detective stopped writing. The chief's face went from proud to furious. Briggs stared at the table like it might swallow him. And then we brought in the binder, months of complaints with Harper's name on them, all the unsubstantiated findings, the settlement payouts that lined up with those cases, statements from business owners who all told the same story about being asked to support the officers or deal with endless tickets and visits, all of it signed off by Sergeant Briggs. At that point, the only question left was whether the department was going to pretend it didn't see what was right in front of it, and to his credit, the chief didn't. He told them to put their guns and badges on the table. Brooks's hands were shaking as he did it. Harper tried to throw around his years of service and his union, but there's not a lot left to argue when your own words and your own face are playing on a screen. Eventually his badge hit the wood like the others. Federal agents came in, read them their rights, and walked them out in handcuffs, and yeah, that happened. The same man who had leaned over me on my porch, telling me to remember who runs this neighborhood, walked past me with his hands behind his back while I stood there and watched his world shrink. In the months that followed, the headlines filled in the rest. Harper took a plea on federal civil rights and assault charges and is serving time. Briggs was convicted for obstruction and conspiracy. Brooks cooperated fully and ended up on probation with a permanent ban from law enforcement. The precinct is under a consent decree, now with outside oversight and a civilian board that actually matters. Old cases are being reopened, and some of the people who were ignored or quietly paid off are finally getting phone calls they should have gotten years ago. About 6 months after that conference room, I stood on my back deck with a mug of coffee, looking out at the same neat lawns, the same mailboxes, the same kids on bikes, and to a stranger it probably looked like nothing had changed. But I knew, and so did they, that the idea of who runs that neighborhood had shifted, even if just a little. It didn't feel like a clean movie ending. It felt heavy and real. One bad cop and his enablers were gone, but the system that made him feel untouchable is still out there in other towns on other streets. And that's the part that keeps me putting the suit back on. But that day, watching those badges on the table, I won't lie, it felt like justice, not perfect or complete, but real. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think what happened to him and his little circle was enough too harsh, not nearly enough? Have you ever watched someone abuse their power and either walk away untouched or finally get what was coming to them? Tell me your thoughts and your stories in the comments. What you think real accountability should look like, and if this story hit something in you or gave you even a little bit of hope that arrogance can come back around. Hit like, subscribe, share it with someone who thinks their title or their uniform makes them untouchable, because sooner or later the truth shows up, and when it does, it cuts deeper than any pair of scissors ever could.